The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clanged against the basement floor as Andrea's voice drifted down from upstairs, cold and matter of fact, like she was discussing the weather. Nick, I need you to pack a bag tonight. You're staying at your parents' place. My real boyfriend is coming over, and I don't want any awkward encounters. I stood there in my boxers and oil-stained t-shirt, staring at the leaking pipe I'd been trying to fix for the past hour. The same pipe that had been dripping for 3 weeks while she complained about the water stains on her precious hardwood floors. The irony wasn't lost on me. Did you hear me? Her voice carried that familiar edge of impatience, the same tone she used when talking to difficult clients at the real estate office. I climbed the creaky stairs, wiping my hands on an old rag. Andrea stood in our kitchen, her kitchen, apparently, wearing a black dress I'd never seen before. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, makeup flawless despite it being a Tuesday evening in our sleepy town of Millbrook. Real boyfriend? I asked, keeping my voice steady. 20 years of marriage, and she was discussing this like rescheduling a dentist appointment. Oh, come on, Nick. Don't act surprised. We both know this hasn't been working for months. She adjusted her earrings, avoiding my eyes. Eric is sophisticated, ambitious. He understands my goals. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Eric Phelps, the flashy tech consultant who'd moved to town 6 months ago, driving around in his gold BMW like he owned the place. I'd seen him at Murphy's bar, holding court with the younger crowd, always checking his phone and talking loudly about his latest deals. How long? I asked. Does it matter? Look, I'm trying to be civilized about this. I could have just changed the locks. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Bryn, Andrea's business partner and supposed best friend. Girl, you better hurry. He's already at the Lakeside Inn asking about you. Andrea snatched the phone, her cheeks flushing. Bryn's just excited for me. She thinks Eric and I make a perfect couple. I'm sure she does. I walked to the kitchen table, where I'd left a manila folder earlier that morning. Important documents I'd been meaning to file away. Tax records, business licenses, old correspondence from my days running the auto shop. Nothing earth-shattering, but apparently enough to make Eric nervous. What are those? Andrea asked, eyeing the folder. Just paperwork. Boring stuff. I tucked it under my arm. I'll be back tomorrow for more of my things. She nodded, already distracted, checking her reflection in the microwave door. Fine, just try not to make this harder than it needs to be. I grabbed my jacket and keys, pausing at the front door. Mrs. Beale, our 70-something neighbor, was watering her flowers on the porch next door. She gave me a knowing look and a small wave. In a town like Millbrook, secrets had a way of becoming public knowledge faster than you could say a fair. My parents' house was only 10 minutes away, but I drove around for an hour, processing what had just happened. The streets of downtown Millbrook were mostly empty, just a few cars parked outside Murphy's bar and the late-night diner. This was supposed to be our life together, our town, our future. Now I was just another middle-aged guy whose wife had traded him in for a newer model. I finally pulled into my parents' driveway around midnight. Mom was already asleep, but Dad was up watching old westerns in his recliner. Trouble at home? He asked without looking away from the TV. You could say that. He nodded, understanding without needing details. Couch pulls out into a bed. Coffee's on a timer for 6. I settled onto the familiar couch where I'd spent countless nights as a teenager, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of the evening. Andrea had seemed almost relieved, like she'd been waiting for the right moment to drop this bomb. The dress, the makeup, the casual cruelty of it all. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. My phone started buzzing around 2 in the morning. First one call, then another. By the time I checked, there were 33 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic texts from Andrea. Nick, call me back. Where are you? This is important. Eric saw your documents and freaked out. He left without explanation. Please come back. Something's wrong. Who are you really? I turned off the phone and closed my eyes, a small smile playing at the corners of my mouth. Maybe this night wasn't going to end the way Andrea had planned after all. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical for October in northern Maine. I'd barely slept, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. Dad was already gone for his morning walk, leaving fresh coffee and a note. Whatever she did, you're better off knowing now. My phone had been buzzing all night. 47 missed calls from Andrea, 12 from Bryn, and even 3 from numbers I didn't recognize. I scrolled through the text messages over my coffee, each one more desperate than the last. Niera, Nick, I made a mistake. Come home so we can talk. Bryn, your wife is losing her mind. What did you do to Eric? Nier, this is Eric. We need to meet. There's been a misunderstanding. I drove to the auto shop first, needing the familiar comfort of engines and honest work. Big Joe was already there, a mountain of a man who'd been my business partner for 15 years. He looked up from the Ford pickup he was working on, grease covering his massive hands. You look like hell, Nick. Rough night? Andrea's leaving me for that tech guy, Eric Phelps. Joe whistled low. The one with the fancy car and the big mouth? Heard he's been spreading money around town like he's some kind of hotshot investor. What do you mean? Been buying drinks for everyone at Murphy's, talking about big business deals, new opportunities. Even heard he's been helping some of the local ladies with their financial planning. Joe made air quotes, his expression skeptical. I thought about this while I worked on a brake job, the familiar routine of tools and parts helping me think clearly. Eric had seemed nervous about those documents, but they were just standard business paperwork, unless he thought they were something else entirely. Around noon, I drove back to Willow Street. Mrs. Beale was on her porch again, tending to her autumn flowers. She waved me over with barely contained excitement. Nick, dear, I hope you don't mind me saying, but there was quite a commotion at your place last night. Oh? That young man in the gold car arrived around 8:30, all dressed up with flowers. But then around 2 in the morning, I heard shouting. Saw him storm out to his car, tires squealing as he drove off. Andrea was on the porch in her bathrobe, calling after him. Mrs. Beale leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Then this morning, she was out there at 7, pacing around like a caged animal, talking on her phone. Sounded like she was begging someone to call her back. I thanked Mrs. Beale and approached my own front door. Andrea opened it before I could knock, looking haggard despite her attempt at makeup. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usually perfect hair disheveled. Nick, thank goodness, we need to talk. The house felt different somehow, like the air itself had changed. I followed her into the living room, noting the half-empty wine bottle on the coffee table, the scattered tissues, the general disorder that Andrea usually never tolerated. What happened with Eric? I asked, settling into my old chair. He saw those documents you left on the table, started asking questions about your background, your business connections. Then he got this strange look on his face and said he needed to research something. Next thing I know, he's making excuses and practically running out the door. What kind of questions? About your military service, your security clearance, whether you still had connections in law enforcement. She wrapped her arms around herself. Nick, what aren't you telling me? Eric seemed genuinely frightened. I almost laughed. My military service had been 4 years as a vehicle mechanic, nothing glamorous or mysterious. My security clearance had expired 15 years ago. But apparently Eric's guilty conscience had filled in the blanks with something much more sinister. I'm just a guy who fixes cars, Andrea. You know that. Then why did he react that way? He kept saying something about operational security and keeping a low profile. It was like he thought you were some kind of undercover agent or something. This was getting interesting. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but instead slipped down to the basement. Something had been nagging at me since last night. A memory of Andrea acting strangely over the past few months. Hushed phone conversations, unexplained absences, new clothes and jewelry that didn't match our budget. I started searching through the cluttered basement, looking for anything out of place. Behind the old Christmas decorations, tucked inside a box labeled winter clothes, I found what I was looking for, a second cell phone, still warm from recent use. The phone wasn't password protected. Andrea had always been careless about security. I scrolled through months of text messages between her and Eric, each one making my stomach turn a little more. But it wasn't just the romantic messages that caught my attention. There were discussions about money, about investment opportunities, about using Andrea's real estate connections to help Eric's business ventures. One thread of messages from 3 weeks ago made everything clear. Eric, the Riverside property deal went through. Your cut is $8,000. Andrea, deposited where? Eric, same account as always. Bryn helped set up the transfer. Andrea, good. Nick never checks that account anyway. I photographed the most damaging messages, then carefully replaced the phone exactly where I'd found it. Walking back upstairs, I felt a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't just about an affair anymore. This was about money, deception, and a level of betrayal that went far deeper than I'd imagined. Andrea was still in the living room, nervously checking her own phone. Find what you were looking for in the bathroom, she asked sarcastically. Just needed a minute to think. I sat down across from her. Tell me more about Eric's business ventures, the ones you and Bryn have been helping with. Her face went pale. I don't know what you mean. The Riverside property deal. Your cut was 8,000, wasn't it? The color drained completely from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Nick, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But first, I think we need to have a conversation with Bryn, and maybe Eric, if he's brave enough to show his face again. I stood up, grabbing my jacket. I'll be staying at Dad's for a while longer. We'll talk again soon, Andrea, when you're ready to tell me the whole truth. As I walked to my truck, I could hear her calling my name from the porch, but I didn't look back. Mrs. Beale gave me a thumbs up from her flower garden. In a town like Millbrook, everyone loved a good story, and this one was just getting started. Murphy's Bar sat on Main Street like an old friend, all weathered brick and neon beer signs. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, and tonight I was counting on that. Big Joe was already holding down our usual corner booth when I arrived, nursing a beer and watching the evening news. You look like a man with a plan, he said as I slid into the opposite seat. Something like that, I signaled the bartender for a beer. What do you know about Eric Phelps' business dealings around town? Joe's expression darkened. More than I'd like. He's been making the rounds, convincing folks to invest in his technology ventures, mostly targeting women, if you ask me. Smooth talker, promises of big returns, always dressed like he stepped out of a magazine. Anyone specific? Well, your wife and Bryn for starters, but also Janet Morrison from the bank, couple of the ladies who work at the town hall, even Mrs. Patterson who runs the flower shop. Joe took a long drink. Pattern seems to be women with access to business accounts or property information. I thought about the text messages I'd seen, the casual way Andrea and Eric had discussed their deal. How many other deals had there been? How many other women had Eric charmed into helping his schemes? There's something else, Joe continued, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. My cousin Danny works at the state motor vehicle department, ran Eric's plates for me out of curiosity. Cars registered in Massachusetts under a different first name. Edward, not Eric. And there's a lien on it from a bank in Boston. This kept getting better. Eric wasn't just a cheating boyfriend. He was running some kind of long-term con, using fake names and borrowed money to finance his lifestyle while he worked his way through Millbrook's female population. Danny find anything else? Address on the registration doesn't exist. Post office box in a strip mall that closed down 6 months ago. Joe leaned forward. Nick, I think your wife got mixed up with a professional. Before I could respond, the bar's front door opened, and Bryn walked in, scanning the room until she spotted me. She approached our table with the kind of determined stride that meant trouble. Nick Hollis, we need to talk. Bryn was Andrea's age, but tried to dress 20 years younger, all tight jeans and low-cut tops that didn't quite work anymore. Tonight she looked frazzled, her usual confidence replaced by something closer to panic. Bryn, join us, I gestured to an empty chair. Joe was just telling me about Eric's business ventures around town. She glanced nervously at Joe, then back at me. Look, I don't know what Andrea told you, but this whole situation is getting out of hand. Eric's been calling me all day, asking questions about you, wanting to know if you have connections to law enforcement or federal agencies. Why would he think that? Because of those documents he saw at your house. Something about military contracts and security clearances. He's convinced you're either undercover or connected to people who could cause him problems. I almost felt sorry for Eric. His paranoid imagination had turned my boring paperwork into evidence of some elaborate government conspiracy. But his fear was my opportunity. What kind of problems is Eric worried about? Bryn shifted uncomfortably. He said something about previous situations in other towns, about needing to keep a low profile. Nick, I think he might be in some kind of trouble already. What about the money, Bryn? The deals you've been helping him and Andrea with. Her face crumpled. It started small. Eric said he needed local partners for property investments, people who understood the market. Andrea has access to all the real estate listings, knows which properties are undervalued. I just helped with the paperwork, for a cut of the profits. Yes, but it was legitimate. We were providing valuable services, market research, local connections. Eric said that's how business works in the modern economy. Joe snorted. Modern economy, right. How much money are we talking about, Bryn? She looked around the bar again, then leaned closer. Over the past 4 months, maybe 30,000, split between Andrea and me. But Eric said the big deals were coming, that we could make 6 figures if we stayed committed to the partnership. 30,000. No wonder Andrea had been buying new clothes and talking about investment opportunities. She'd been skimming from their real estate business, using insider information to help Eric flip properties, taking cash payments that never showed up on any official records. Where's Eric now? I don't know. He was supposed to meet us for dinner tonight, but he never showed. Andrea's been calling him for hours, getting increasingly hysterical. She thinks you scared him off somehow. I finished my beer, considering my options. Eric was clearly running scared, probably already planning his exit strategy from Millbrook. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd gotten greedy and involved too many people in his schemes. In a small town, that kind of exposure was dangerous. Bryn, I need you to do something for me. Call Eric, tell him I want to meet. Tell him I'm willing to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. What kind of arrangement? The kind where everyone walks away quietly, no questions asked, no authorities involved. But it has to be tonight, before he decides to disappear. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. What if he doesn't believe me? He will. Because right now, I'm the only thing standing between Eric and a very public investigation into his business practices. And I think he's smart enough to know that. Joe raised his beer in a mock toast. This should be interesting. As Bryn made the call, I thought about Andrea sitting at home, probably still trying to reach Eric, still believing their romance was just temporarily derailed by a misunderstanding. She had no idea that her sophisticated boyfriend was about to learn a hard lesson about small-town justice. The phone call was brief. Bryn hung up and looked at me with a mixture of fear and admiration. He'll meet you at the Lakeside Inn in an hour, room 237. But Nick, he sounded really nervous. What if he tries something desperate? I smiled, feeling more confident than I had in months. Bryn, the only desperate person in this situation is a con man who just realized he's been outsmarted by a small-town mechanic. Trust me, Eric's going to be very reasonable. The Lakeside Inn sat on the edge of Millbrook like a relic from better days, its faded sign promising color TV and air conditioning as if those were still selling points. Eric's gold BMW was parked in the shadows near the back of the lot, positioned for a quick escape. Smart man, but not smart enough. I knocked on the door of room 237 at exactly 9 o'clock. Eric opened it immediately, like he'd been watching through the peephole. He looked different from the confident charmer I'd seen around town. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled, and there was a nervous energy in his movements that suggested too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Nick, thanks for coming. He stepped aside to let me in, then immediately locked the door behind me. The room was standard motel fare, 2 beds, a small table, and the lingering smell of industrial disinfectant. Eric's laptop was open on the table, surrounded by scattered papers and empty coffee cups. You've been busy, I observed, noting what looked like flight information on the computer screen. Just keeping my options open. Eric sat on the edge of one bed, gesturing for me to take the chair by the table. Bryn said you wanted to discuss an arrangement. That's right, but first I'm curious about something. What exactly did you think those documents were? Eric's laugh was hollow. Come on, Nick. Military service records, security clearance paperwork, correspondence with defense contractors. Either you're still connected to some very serious people, or you're running your own operation and using the auto shop as cover. I had to admire his imagination. In Eric's world, apparently everyone was running some kind of scam, so a folder of old paperwork could only mean I was a bigger player than he'd realized. What if I told you I'm just a mechanic who keeps better records than most? Then I'd say you're either lying, or you have no idea how dangerous those documents make you look to someone in my position. And what position is that exactly? Eric stood up, pacing to the window and back. Look, I've been in situations before where local law enforcement got interested in my business model. Usually it's just a misunderstanding, but sometimes it's better to relocate before things get complicated. How many times have you relocated, Eric? That's not important. What's important is finding a solution that works for everyone. He stopped pacing, fixing me with what was probably his best sincere look. I genuinely care about Andrea. This isn't just business for me. Hoy, $30,000 says otherwise. His face went pale. How did you? Never mind. Look, that money was payment for legitimate services. Andrea and Bryn provided valuable market research, local connections, insider knowledge of property values. In the consulting world, that's worth significant compensation. In the real world, that's called fraud. Only if someone decides to make it an issue. Which brings us back to our arrangement. Eric sat down again, leaning forward with his hands clasped. I'm prepared to offer you a substantial sum to keep this situation private. Say, 50,000, transferred to any account you specify. 50,000 to keep quiet about what? About the business relationship between Andrea, Bryn, and myself. About any irregularities in our consulting agreements. About my presence in Millbrook at all. I pretended to consider this. That's a generous offer, but I have a counter-proposal. I'm listening. You disappear tonight, not just from Millbrook, but from Andrea's life completely. No phone calls, no text messages, no forwarding address, and you return every penny you took from those women. Eric's confident mask slipped completely. That's not possible. The money's already been invested in legitimate opportunities. I can't just liquidate everything overnight. Then you have a problem. Nick, be reasonable. I can give you 25,000 right now, tonight, cash. The rest will take time to arrange. I stood up, walking to his laptop. The screen showed flight information for Boston, departing at 6 a.m. Planning an early departure? Just exploring options. Look, what do you really want here? You want Andrea back? Fine, she's yours. I'll disappear, no contact, like it never happened. But I can't return money that's tied up in active investments. Show me. What? Show me these investments. Prove to me that the money isn't sitting in some account you can access right now. Eric's hesitation told me everything I needed to know. He moved to block my view of the laptop screen, but not before I glimpsed what looked like online banking information. That's confidential business information. Eric, we both know you're not a legitimate consultant. We both know those investments don't exist. And we both know that money is sitting in accounts you can access from that laptop right now. He sat down heavily, the fight going out of him. What if I can return some of it? Say, half. Would that be enough for you to let this go? All of it. Plus you never contact Andrea or Bryn again. Plus you leave town tonight and don't come back. And if I refuse? I pulled out my phone, showing him the photographs I'd taken of the text messages. Then tomorrow morning, these go to the local police, the state attorney general's office, and every business owner in town who might have been targeted by your operation. Eric stared at the phone screen, his face cycling through anger, fear, and resignation. You don't understand. There are other people involved in this. People who won't be happy if I just disappear with their money. What other people? Investors from Boston. They fronted me capital to establish operations in small towns throughout northern New England. I've got quotas to meet, returns to deliver. If I just vanish, they'll come looking for explanations. This was getting more complicated than I'd expected. Eric wasn't just a lone con artist. He was part of a larger operation, possibly organized crime, using charm and fake romance to extract money from small-town victims. How many towns? 6 over the past 2 years. The model works because people in places like Millbrook trust easily, especially women who feel overlooked or undervalued. I provide attention, romance, the promise of financial independence. They provide access to local business networks, property information, sometimes direct capital. And when you've extracted everything you can, you disappear. Usually. But Millbrook was supposed to be different. I was supposed to establish a permanent base here, recruit other operators, expand the territory. Eric looked genuinely frustrated. Andrea was perfect for that. Smart, connected, hungry for something bigger than small-town life. I could have made her a real partner. Instead, you made her an accomplice. I made her financially independent. Do you know how much money she's made in 4 months? More than she'd see in 2 years selling houses in this backwater town. I felt a flash of anger, but kept my voice level. And now she's going to lose everything. Her business, her reputation, possibly her freedom. Only if you make this public. That's why we need to reach an understanding. I looked at Eric, really looked at him. He was younger than me, better dressed, more sophisticated in the ways of the world. But he was also desperate, cornered, and running out of options. His confidence was an act, his charm a tool, his entire persona a carefully constructed lie. Here's my final offer, Eric. You have 1 hour to transfer every penny back to the accounts you took it from. Then you get in that fancy car and drive back to Boston, or wherever you came from. In exchange, I don't make those photographs public. and I don't contact your investors to let them know their operation in Millbrook has been compromised. And Andrea? Andrea is my problem to deal with. Eric was quiet for a long moment, staring at his laptop screen. Finally, he nodded slowly. 1 hour. But Nick, you need to understand something. When I disappear, those Boston people are going to want explanations. They might come looking for answers. Let me worry about that. And Andrea's going to hate you for destroying her chance at a better life. I'll take that risk too. Eric opened his laptop and began typing. You know, in a different situation, I think we could have been partners. You've got the kind of strategic thinking that's rare in places like this. Just transfer the money, Eric. As I watched him work, I thought about Andrea sitting at home, probably still trying to call him, still believing their romance was just temporarily complicated by a misunderstanding. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to discover that her sophisticated boyfriend was gone, her financial schemes exposed, and her marriage probably over. But at least she'd wake up free, instead of facing charges for fraud. Sometimes, that was the best outcome you could hope for. The next morning came too soon, and not soon enough. I'd spent the night at my parents' house again, lying awake and thinking about everything that had changed in just 48 hours. Eric had followed through on his promise. By midnight, he'd transferred the money back to the various accounts he'd infiltrated, cleared out his motel room, and disappeared into the night. His BMW was gone from the Lakeside Inn parking lot, and according to Mrs. Beale's early morning intelligence network, no one had seen him around town. But Eric's departure was just the beginning. Now came the harder part, dealing with Andrea and the wreckage of our marriage. I drove to Willow Street around 8, knowing Andrea would be getting ready for work. She was in the kitchen when I arrived, still in her bathrobe, staring at her phone with an expression of growing panic. Nick, thank goodness. Have you heard from Eric? He was supposed to call me last night, but I haven't heard anything since yesterday afternoon. We need to talk, Andrea. Something in my tone made her look up from the phone. What's wrong? You look serious. Eric's gone. Left town last night, probably for good. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of desperate hope. Gone? What do you mean gone? Did you talk to him? I did. We had a very enlightening conversation about his business practices, his real identity, and his plans for the future, none of which included you. Andrea sank into a kitchen chair, still clutching her phone. I don't understand. He said he loved me. He said we were building something together. You were building something together, a fraud scheme that could have landed you in prison. I sat down across from her, pulling out my own phone to show her the photographs of the text messages. She stared at the screen, her face growing paler with each image. Where did you get these? Your backup phone, the one hidden in the basement Christmas decorations. You went through my private communications? Andrea, you announced you were leaving me for another man. Privacy stopped being a consideration at that point. She was quiet for a long moment, scrolling through the evidence of her own deception. The money was legitimate, Nick. We provided real services, valuable information. Eric explained how modern consulting works. Eric explained how modern fraud works. And you bought into it because it made you feel important, sophisticated, like you were part of something bigger than Millbrook. There's nothing wrong with wanting more than this. She gestured around our modest kitchen, her voice rising. This house, this town, this life, where nothing ever changes and nothing ever happens. Eric showed me possibilities. Eric showed you how to betray your husband, defraud your business partner, and commit crimes that could have destroyed your entire future. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Tears started flowing now, ruining her carefully applied makeup. He said we'd travel together, that I could help him expand his business into other markets. He made me feel alive again. I felt a stab of something. Not quite sympathy, but recognition of the loneliness that had made her vulnerable to Eric's manipulation. Our marriage had been struggling for months, maybe years. I'd been focused on the auto shop. She'd been focused on her real estate career. And somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being partners and become roommates. Andrea, Eric wasn't building a future with you. He was using you to steal money and gather information for a larger criminal operation. When I confronted him last night, he admitted that this was his business model. Target lonely women in small towns, romance them into helping with financial schemes, then disappear when things get complicated. You're lying. He's done this in 6 towns over the past 2 years. You weren't special to him. You were just another mark. She threw her phone across the kitchen, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Even if that's true, at least he made me feel wanted. When's the last time you looked at me like I was desirable? When's the last time you talked to me about dreams and possibilities instead of leaky pipes and car repairs? The accusation stung because it contained truth. I had been taking Andrea for granted, assuming our marriage was solid enough to survive neglect and routine. Eric had offered her attention, excitement, and the promise of a more glamorous life. Of course she'd been tempted. "You're right," I said quietly. "I haven't been the husband you deserved. But Andrea, the solution wasn't to steal money and plan to abandon everything we built together." "What we built," she laughed bitterly. "Nick, look around. This is what we built. A house that's falling apart. A marriage that died years ago. A life so boring that a con man seemed like an improvement. So what do you want to do now?" "I want Eric to come back. I want to believe that what we had was real, that he'll call and explain everything, that this is all some terrible misunderstanding." "That's not going to happen, Andrea. Eric's probably in another state by now, looking for his next target." She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. "Then I've lost everything, haven't I? My marriage, my lover, my chance at something better." "You haven't lost everything. The money's been returned, so there shouldn't be any criminal charges. Your real estate license is safe. Bryn doesn't know I have evidence of her involvement, so your business partnership can survive if you want it to." "What about us?" I looked around our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals, planned our future, argued about money and dreams, and